Prejudice occurs in many ways. It's not always violent, but often is. Sometimes it's an intolerant undercurrent that breeds shame and division. That's why Open University academics Dr. M.J. Barker and Professor Darren Langridge are here to explore the dream of a human right to sexual and gender identity.
So Darren, I know you've been writing a lot about sexual citizenship lately. Can you say a bit about where we're at in terms of human rights for LGBT people?
It's an interesting question because I think there's enormous variation. If we look at a global perspective, there's a huge variation in terms of equality for people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. So in some countries there's been a lot of progressive equalities legislation, in other countries none, and people are actively discriminated against in some places. Indeed, in 2011, the United Nations commissioned a report that specifically set out to investigate sexual and gender identity. And the report produced a mass of findings which were actually incredibly valuable. Since that, there hasn't been a resolution because there hasn't been a consensus amongst the nations of the world around these issues. Because in many of those nations, there is active criminalisation of people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender.
Absolutely, and I know we don't have that anymore here. It's kind of 60 years since the Wolfenden report, but we still have problems in this area. I mean, the bench we're sitting on here.
This bench is in memory of Jodie Dabrowski, who was murdered here in 2005, and it was a brutal homophobic hate crime. Two men specifically set out with the aim of harming someone who was gay, and they came here, Clapham, London, to do that.
And even this very year, 2016, we saw the terrible attacks, the Pulse bombing in Orlando, Florida, where 49 people, were murdered in an attack on an LGBT nightclub.
Absolutely. It's kind of in a sense that whilst a lot of people think that things have changed for the better, and they have in many ways, we've got, for instance, marriage after all, which everybody proclaims is the sort of goal for equality. Actually, there's a great deal of inequality still left in the world, and that's both mundane practices and also extreme acts of violence.
Think about post-Brexit. The statistics is that homophobic, biphobic and transphobic hate crime has gone up by about 147% post-Brexit in the last few months, that is, in this year. And we know that the rates of transphobic hate crime, particularly homicide, is really high, even though there is increased positive kind of representation of trans people in the media. So it's not always simple as things are getting better all the time.
If we look at it from a global perspective, the picture is even more complex. Then the intersection of different aspects of someone's identity is critically important to how they're treated by states and also the people within those states.
So I guess our question for you is, what things do you think would need to change in terms of policy and wider culture if we were to reach a state where we had equality and human rights for people of all genders and all sexualities?